If you're a parent, is any of this familiar? You go to the store and grab some groceries, and your toddler is tugging at you for some extra treats. Seems like every aisle she spots all of the, quote, sales and wants you to buy it. Or maybe you're over at Target picking up some clothes for the kids, and you're bombarded with requests. Those shoes, that shirt, that dress. Or how about your teen is about to go out with their friends. Before they leave, they ask you, "Can I have some cash?" You're probably wondering, do these kids know how money works? Today, we're going beyond allowances and talking about how you can help your kids to budget, save, and invest wisely. Welcome to the Couple Money Podcast, where we're focused on helping spouses get on the same page, dump their debt faster, and get on the path to financial freedom together. Support for this podcast comes from 5 Days to 5K course. A big headache for many couples in the community is they know what they need to do. They need to knock down this debt or save up for a big goal. The question is, where does this money come from? Budget's tight. So I designed a free week-long course that will show you step-by-step how to find, save, and make some extra money. And it's broken down into manageable chunks because I know we are all busy. You can sign up at couplemoney.com/5K. Do you remember how you handled money growing up? I can't recall exactly when I started getting an allowance. But I remember clearly being in second grade, going around the neighborhood collecting bottles and cans to recycle so I can earn some extra spending money. We're talking about a few dollars at most at a time, but it felt like I was rich. And when I would get home, my grandma would insist that I take a portion of that money and save it. Later on through the years, I remember my parents would explain that if I wanted anything beyond the allowance, I had to work for it. And when I became a teenager, I remember sitting down, looking at my family's budget and seeing if I could find ways to save. And as grateful as I am for learning what I did, looking back at how I mismanaged money later, got into debt around college, I can see there were some gaps in my financial knowledge. My husband and I both want our girls to know the value of a hard-earned dollar and how to use it wisely. That's not going to happen by accident. It's going to take a plan and it's going to take a system. If you too want to help your little ones as well become money savvy, make sure you save this episode. Bill Dwight, creator of the amazing family banking app FamZoo, is here today on the show. Besides being a tech whiz, he's a father of 5 who has had plenty of experience with the ups and downs of raising kids to become adults. In this episode, we get into when to start introducing finances and budgeting even at a preschool level, getting your kids comfortable with saving and investing. And this might surprise you, why your kids need to get a loan from you. I think we'll have plenty of comments on this episode. Hope you enjoy. We want to raise generous, responsible, kind adults, and it really is a process. And finances is a part of that, whether we want to say that out loud.
As Ron Lieber always says, one of my favorite quotes is, every conversation about money is really about values.
Exactly.
The two are intimately intertwined. So I think a lot of people apologize when they start talking about money, and then you realize, hey, these are really values-based conversations and something we should embrace.
I was looking at one of your latest articles talking about your interview with Andy over at Marriage, Kids, and Money.
Yeah.
About it's worth the fight. And sometimes it does feel like you're trying to teach them, and sometimes whether it's about money or not, is it clicking? Is it sticking? Right. What's going to happen?
I mean, the neat thing for me now is that I am on my 5th teenager. Our youngest is 16. And so we've kind of been through the journey. Our oldest is 28 this year. And so, we've had the benefit of seeing the kids go through the teen years, emerge from the teen years, thankfully.
You
Thankfully, that's a
survived.
finite passage, thankfully. And realize that, sometimes when you think the messages aren't sinking in or sticking, that they really are. Now I have that perspective, and I think it's nice for younger parents to kind of hear, stick with it. It seems like they might not be listening to you, but they really are. And I think that's you need to hear that as an embattled parent sometimes.
I was encouraged by that. And I think that's a kind of a great opening. When you first talk about money with your kids, some people say, like, what's the right age? That's that first milestone. As parents, we struggle like back and forth. When are kids ready to maybe talk about the very essentials of finances? And is preschool too early? If not, is there anything you can talk with them on their level?
Our granddaughter is about 1.5 now. And the kind of the latest video that we saw on Facebook was her pretending that she was shopping in the apartment with my son. And, it's just very funny. They are little sponges, and they're watching everything we do. And even at 1.5, they're starting to grapple with the concepts of, what is this purchasing things and that I see mom and dad doing, and emulating that. And I was just reviewing a post by the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau.
Yeah.
And they were sort of reinforcing that these money habits and stuff start very, very early. Preschool is not too early. I think you saw in our Facebook group today, I was asking some people about, what their experiences were with youngsters. And I remembered that a mutual friend of ours, Alan Scott Turner, did a book, Money A to Z. Yeah. And that's, I think that, for the very youngest ones, sort of introducing with picture books and things like that. In fact, another mutual friend of ours, Jay Money, he did this funny post one time, which was his own money alphabet. And so I actually ended up making my own money alphabet, A is for this, B is for that, for my kids, that kind of encapsulated my values. But that's a fun exercise too. You could make your own little book with your kids. One thing I would say is repetition is really important. It's not like you have this one conversation, right? There's no other skills that you learn in one shot. So, you just keep iterating. They mature over time. And so you kind of fill in more detail about the message as you go. But one of my favorite pieces of advice is just give kids the play-by-play on everything. In the grocery store with the kids and making a purchase, give them a little play-by-play on what's happening. Ask them what they think is happening. Turn it around. You're like, what do you think is happening? Like when I swipe this card, or where do you think this money comes from? Or how do you think we pay for, these things? Ron Lieber has a great book, The Opposite of Spoiled.
Yeah, I love that book.
He says a great technique is, you're always going to get that awkward question like, are we rich? Are we poor? How much do you make, Mom?
Yes.
And I love Ron's technique, which was to kind of turn it around and say, well, why do you ask? What are you curious about? For two reasons. One is you buy some time.
Yes.
So you can make up an answer. And two, their motivation for asking might not be at all what you're assuming.
Fantastic. Because going back to what you said at the beginning, how you spend money is about what you value and what you prioritize. Yeah. And having those conversations are a great introduction, because our 3-year-old is watching her 7-year-old sister. And what she sees is like, hey, she has an allowance. She gets to buy stuff. And now she's like, I want an allowance. Why? And she's like, because I want to buy stuff. You know, so now it's what we're trying out with her is when we go to the grocery store, her snack budget. So she has one item she can pick for a snack budget.
Yep.
She's a great
I love that technique, by the way, is that a trip to get a treat or something like that is a mini budgeting opportunity, right?
Yeah.
Like you might not start with an allowance. You might just start with every once in a while when you go out to a treat or whatever. Well, here's your budget. Here's your little mini budget, put it in your wallet or your purse for our outing. And that's how much you have to spend. And you can't spend more than that. You could spend less than that and choose to spend on something else. So you're just starting that dialogue, very simply, without having to worry about how much allowance does someone get per week and all that stuff, just around a very specific incident. And, I think that that's really helpful with young kids. And then as they get older, like we can see on our family finance site, the number of transactions for kids just keeps escalating, right? But it starts very, very low for young kids. You're providing for almost all of their needs, and that's completely appropriate. But as they get into middle school and get more independent, that's when they really start transacting. And so, that's when you get towards more of a formal budget. Whenever you decide it's appropriate, I think it's right to start to transition them to learning about all types of money and learn about how all types of money are finite.
Yes.
They're not magical. I don't want, when my kid goes off to college, I don't want them thinking a card is magical.
Yeah.
I want them to
get that offer for credit cards.
Yeah. And I want them to have, gotten a decline on their card and felt the shame and embarrassment, when they're out and they try to, buy something and they don't have a balance and they didn't bother to check it. I want them to be a little embarrassed. That's a very memorable moment.
Yeah. You don't want that to repeat. And kind of, that's a good point. Like, I think our natural tendency for parents, it may be for me being a mom, is like protect your kids and you don't want them to have these mess ups. But there is a value for them while they're young, still in your house, to screw up with money.
Absolutely.
To have those bad memories in a sense.
And I'd rather have them experiencing that with me than a bank.
Yes.
Last I checked, my bank does not love my kids. My credit card loves my kids even less, except when they transact.
Yes.
So, I think that, and also it's just about sort of developing this comfort about talking about money and screw-ups with money. Because I want them to feel like, I had open conversations with mom and dad since I was 2 about money. So that's totally natural. Yeah. And I just think that's healthy. I want to set that precedent early that, hey, it's okay. You messed up here. I messed up too. Let's talk about it. Let's discuss it. I don't have all the answers, but let's at least discuss it.
Something I know we care about for our kids and a lot of parents is we want them to be somewhat natural savers or, start developing that habit of saving. How can you do that? Because I know like we use FAMZoo and we absolutely love it. Because it's FAMZoo and that tool to encourage your kids to save. And I've seen had an article about that, kind of match it. You're bribing your kid, teaching them better than the bank's rates right now.
Yeah. The way I feel about that is the general, so our product aside, use any product, use any system. You could use a spreadsheet. That's actually how FAMZoo started, was a spreadsheet. But it's the notion of a system and introducing kids to the concept of a system and automation. And then the constant reinforcement. So, my favorite, we have this thing called parent paid interest, and you don't need a product to do it. You could calculate it yourself. If your kid has a savings bucket, then how about you encourage them to grow that bucket by paying them a parent paid interest rate on it. So just do a little simple math, maybe 0.2% a week or whatever. I like to do it weekly because in our system, the kid gets like a text message every time there's activity on their savings card.
Nice.
And so they're constantly being reminded, the money I'm saving is working on its own and growing on its own. And if I leave it alone, it'll continue, stop touching it. Get your hands off that.
Yes.
It'll grow. And so that money can work for itself. And I actually like having a very aggressive interest rate just so it's noticeable. So it's like a couple of pennies a week, right? As opposed to a couple of pennies after a year and then never mentioning it to the kids. Which is kind of what happens in a more traditional savings account thing where they're not interacting with it. So I want it to be very much in front of them. And then I want the cycle time to be very rapid so that they're constantly being reminded, that money over there is growing. Yeah. And it'll be working when your teenager finally sends you a text and says, Dad, could you move the $100 that I just made from my spending card to my savings card because I want to earn your Bank of Dad interest. And I'm totally okay with that. Yeah. Because even though I'm giving a guaranteed interest rate that's pretty awesome, I'm interested in the mindset, which is I want to move my money to where it's productive. And, I think that they will continue that habit even after well, I know they do, because not my kids, many of my kids are too old now for the bank of dad interest rate. So I just think it's that mindset that they're looking for that opportunity for their money to grow. That's a mindset a lot of kids never have or never even think of. And you don't need technology for that. That can be a written rule. You could be writing this down in a ledger, and up at the top you could say the rules are 2% per week, but never more than $2, right?
Yeah.
So I don't want to imply that you have to use some fancy pants technology for it. It's just that's why we call ourselves Fam Zoo, because every family is a zoo. So we're trying to use like technology to make it easy for people to follow through. Yeah.
But that's good, because that's a positive habit, saving. Something that, people feel very strongly about, though, is dealing with debt. Families in my community, they've personally dealt with debt. Maybe now they're living debt free, but they still want to teach their kids how debt works, whether it's just like pass on their value of let's try to live debt free, or if they are feeling like there's good debt versus bad debt because that's their value. Like, how do we gently guide our kids with something that could be a huge trap? I'd love to get your take and some ideas on that.
Yeah, I think this is a great topic. And a lot of parents will say, never make your child a loan, because you're just teaching them that they can have things now instead of later. And I actually disagree with that. I think that I want each of my kids to experience at least one kind of major loan under my watch, so that they know that a loan is all about trade-offs. Like, so for example, each of our kids have gotten loans from the bank of mom and dad for laptop computers.
Okay.
And so the key thing is that we formalize it in the sense that we say, all right, we're going to record this in an account. Again, it could be a ledger, could be anything. In our case, it's like an online account, and says you've been loaned $600 or whatever, and we're going to now garnish your wages, whether it's chores, allowance, or part-time job that they have. Each week you're going to be paying down a little bit of this loan, so that when they don't have the same amount of money they had last week, because now they're paying off this loan obligation, they're understanding, oh, this is a trade-off. That's right. Like every week I'm paying off this computer or this phone, or maybe it's the delta between the base model phone and the more expensive phone, maybe they have to pick that up, but something, so that they're experiencing that. Because there's such a world of difference between mom and dad telling you, don't go into debt, it's horrible, versus every week they're making a payment on a loan to the bank of mom and dad. You set up a simulation within the family, within the privacy and value-driven environment of the family, to simulate the things that the kids are going to be doing and using as adults, so that they can learn in a safe environment and make those mistakes with you, but you're previewing to them what it's going to be like out in the jungle.
I appreciate it. And I kind of want to cover this last habit topic of money that kind of trips some parents up. Many in the community know it's wise to invest, and the earlier the start, the better it is. But they don't feel comfortable enough to even talk about this with their kids. How do you break it down, especially with teens as they get their first jobs and they having some of their own income? How do you introduce investing? How do you work with them?
Yeah, I think with teens, there's two great opportunities to talk about investing. One is if you've set up a 529 for your kids, every time you get that statement, review it with your teenager. The first couple of times, they're going to roll their eyeballs and give you a hard time and all that. But what you're doing is you're sort of reviewing, like, we're saving this money for this event, college. It's this far off. Think about all the things you can talk about there. Where are you putting the money? Are you putting in an index fund? Are you transitioning it out of the stock market into something safer because the time is near?
Yeah.
Like, it's like a mini example of these what do they call them, the date funds or whatever.
Oh, the target date funds.
Date funds, right? It's like a mini exercise of that. So they're getting a preview of that concept, which is very important. And like, we're not, maybe you're saying we're not keeping it all just in cash because we need it to grow. but we're taking some risk here. And, just think of all the conversations that you can kind of naturally get into around that 529 statement. And the nice thing is there's a trigger event to have that conversation, because you're going to get those statements. You could focus on the quarterly statements, or you maybe just do it annually, but there's a nice kind of natural trigger event. The other thing that I think is an awesome opportunity, and it's one of the things I'm most proud of doing for each of my kids, is basically convincing them, that's another way of saying forcing them, to open a Roth as soon as they got that first summer or part-time job. And because then it has all the wonderful incentives. They have to get a job for me to open up for them. I actually, gift them some money, because you can, if they work and earn a certain amount of money, then they can contribute some amount of that to a Roth, to a cap. Well, I like to gift them either some match or even all of it, if you so choose, to get them into the game of investing. As far as they're concerned, it's sort of money that you're investing for the long term. So you can have those conversations. Then you have all the conversations about, well, what are we going to do with this money? Should we put it in an index fund? Should we invest it in Facebook?
Yeah.
All those kinds of things, right? And so, the kicker is that if you do this now, that money is going to be invested for 40 years. They're going to thank you. I mean, you might be dead at the time, but they're going to thank, Dad from way back when, 40 years from now, and be like, wow, that was really powerful. And the other thing about the Roth, some parents might be thinking right now, well, that's great, Bill. I don't have any extra funds to gift my kids for a Roth. Well, you probably have some grandparents in the mix. You can actually engage the broader family in this. And I think that in many families, they would be delighted to contribute maybe $100 to little Johnny's Roth versus some goofy, having to go out and find some goofy gift for graduation or whatnot. You can kind of family source or crowdsource a little bit of that and just get creative.
So happy Bill could join us. He and his team have created a fantastic tool for families over at FamZoo. It's truly a great family banking app that's easy to use. Now, before we close up, I want to focus on some key takeaways I got from our discussion. The first one is, your example is a fantastic teacher. Sometimes we feel like we have to be perfect, but with kids, just be honest. Let them see how you're handling the finances now. Explain out loud what you're trying to do and what's happening with the money. The second one is incentivize good behavior. So if you want to help your kid to start saving and investing, maybe offering some kind of match program will be enough to get them to start that new habit. And finally, talk about your values and priorities. It's not just about the numbers. Give the kids the context of why you're doing what you're doing with the money. Why is it so important for you guys to save so much per month? Why are you guys trying to pay off the debt? Why are you investing now? These conversations mean so much because then it helps them to see that finances, that's not the main thing. It's coming up with your values and your goals and then using your finances to align with that. So there's a lot to talk about right now, and we're going to continue this discussion in our private Facebook community over at Thriving Families. It's free. It's fun. I'd love to get your take so we can swap some stories and ideas about how we're going to help our kids become money savvy. Join us over at couplemoney.com/FB. Thank you so much for listening. As always, I have links to the show notes to connect with the resources we mentioned, plus more over at Couple Money. Don't forget, if you live in Orlando, Detroit, or Kansas City, Stacking Benjamins is coming to your town for a crazy fun-filled night with their Stacking Benjamins tour. I think it's safe to say it's the only personal finance podcast tour in existence. So if you want to have a date night unlike anything else, grab tickets now. Just head over to stackingbenjamins.com/tour. And hey, before we close out, I want to say, if you're a fellow Carolinian or Virginian, please be safe with Hurricane Florence coming. We're over here in Raleigh, and we've packed our bags, and we're keeping an eye on developments. I'll share any updates in the community email or on Instagram, depending on how things are with the storm. But please, I want you guys to be safe. If you haven't already, have an emergency kit and evacuation bag ready to go. I have a list to resources, including FEMA, over at couplemoney.com/kit. I really hope you don't have to use it, but it is better to be safe than sorry. Our theme song was performed by Gentle Regime. Additional music by Lee Rosevear. I want to say thank you so much for your support, leaving those reviews, sharing these episodes. It's really making a difference, guys. It's helping couples get more comfortable, not just talking about the numbers and the finances, but like we talked about this episode, what are our values and priorities? I hope you have a fantastic week. Take care.